Welcome to our first session of 2018, and we've invested in a couple of microphones in the hopes that we'll have better sound, especially from our other members. It's Shure.
Sure.
It's a Shure microphone. John, what were your reservations about the Red Book? I'm sorry, the Thomas Arzt article.
Well, my feeling from reading the article was that it was heavily skewed toward an evolutionary theory of consciousness, which is sort of in line with the old anthropological theories, upward and always, ever upward and forward in progress. And I don't see things usually happening that way in the history of civilization, that it's very rocky forwards and backwards movements. And so what Arzt was talking about was a period of 2,400 years or so for the old Christian ethic, and then that was being replaced by by individuation, and presumably that would run for 2,400 years, I don't know, and then it would be replaced by something else, I don't know.
I'm not taking them literally going forward on that. I think that Dr. Jung's position on astrology, and maybe Bill can also inform on this, was that because ancient man was using astrology, and there were 100 million human beings at 500 BC. Okay, so that's a lot of folks that were running around the planet doing stuff. And at that time, they were doing a lot of stuff based on the stars and based on astrology. And so I don't think Jung ever said that because these stars are doing X, this is going to happen. He never said that. But what he said is that there's a synchronicity, and there were synchronicities over thousands of years among all human beings, and certain things which seemed to happen happened. I don't know, did I ever tell you about the crabs in the inland sea in Japan?
I think you did.
Yeah, okay, well, let me just, for purposes of the video, let me just remind what that is. There were, I don't know, 1,500 years ago, there was a big fight among samurai, and some samurai had to commit seppuku, cut out their bellies and die, and commit suicide. And they did it into the sea near Hiroshima. And the fishermen around there would fish up crabs. And after a while, they got this idea of looking for the spirit of these samurai in the crabs that were in that location, in that locality. And so they would pull these crabs up, and they'd look at the belly of the crab, and if it looked like a samurai, they'd throw it back. But if it didn't look like a samurai, they'd throw it in the boat. And so they kept doing this for like 1,500 years. And so now all the crabs have a samurai on their belly because all the ones that didn't look a bit like a samurai got eaten.
So natural selection in a way.
Yeah, well, unnatural selection. That's one of these leaps of evolution that you talk about, right? So I think that astrology sort of developed kind of like that, people would talk about some astrological event, and they kept talking about it over thousands of years, and they identified, they certainly identified the constellations, and we know that Stonehenge was built, 2000 BC? How, do you know?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either, but it was way BC. And so here these Stone Age guys dragging these mammoth rocks across the southern English moors and setting them up in a precise setting for the astrological, for the astronomical events, right? For spring solstice and all that stuff. So they knew about that stuff, how the planets moved and the sun moved, and how the sun came back in the summertime and went away in the winter, and all that. They were pretty clear about that by a couple thousand years before Christ. And so it strikes me that they were making stories up all along. And the way this normally works, the way it worked with the Tarot and with everything, all storytelling, is what resonates with people survives. What doesn't resonate falls away. Would you think that's a fair statement?
Sure.
Right, okay. So the things that survive are things that are more or less you can point to. And so, in the Chinese zodiac, for example, that goes around every 12 years, and, you're whatever year you are. I happen to be a dog year, and, the discussion of a dog year person pretty much matches me. I'm loyal, there are a lot of other features of a dog that...
How do you clean yourself?
So anyway,
So can I make a question?
yeah, so go ahead.
So my question to you, Skip, is do you not think it's convenient, very convenient, that the turnover in the cycle happens just when Carl Jung happens to be born, okay? And that he invents a new system that he sees as the next step, okay? All right, and so do you not think that's very convenient?
I don't follow it exactly.
You don't follow his comment?
Well, I don't.
Well, he's saying there's
what's
a
the new thing that he's?
The individuation
Well,
is going to
that was
replace
called salvation.
the new ethic
before.
is going to replace the old ethic.
No, that
Okay.
was called salvation before. He didn't come. I'm not sure. I'm getting the feeling that you're saying that he came with the dawning of Aquarius, and he's talking about this new stuff, like sort of born at the right moment, like Jesus or something. Or where are you going? I don't know.
Well, I mean, no, I'm just saying that he's placing the dividing line right at the point where he appears on the planet
Does he do that?
Well,
with Nietzsche and
okay, but
late 19th century.
the question is, what would happen?
Freud, yeah.
What would have happened without Jung? I mean, Jung hasn't had that much influence on our culture yet. Okay, I mean,
He's more like a prophet then.
yeah. I mean, you have this little cul-de-sac of Jungian analysts, and they've actually tried to suppress what he was really talking about. Okay, because what he was really talking about was a fundamental transformation of God, okay, of the God image, okay. And so we can say, okay, the Jungians like to say, oh, well, we're not talking about the metaphysical God, we're only talking about the God image in the unconscious, which we'll get to in chapter 4. But everything in psychology is metaphysical, is it not? It's not? Okay, what's the distinction, Bill? Tell us what the distinction is, then.
I feel like I'm on a panel now.
No, but the thing is,
Well, okay, metaphysics for me it's a thinking man's term. So, if you're talking about the God image, you're talking about something you experience. If you have
Right.
an image, if you have a dream, if you have a painting, if you have a motion picture, you're experiencing it. It's not metaphysical. you know.
Okay,
Yeah.
you're experiencing that within yourself.
And so
yes.
if I
Okay,
experience
and this was a very
God,
good point that you made at the end of the last
Yeah.
session that I noted, which was that you're saying the God image is from an experiential point of view, whereas God, as the metaphysical God, is a thinking man's God.
well, it's also it's it's a weaponized version of the because you can the church can take God and use it for all sorts of propaganda and
Well, and
control.
yes.
Which with an image you really can't do because it's experiential. It comes from within. So it's like you've weaponized the image and throw it back in your face and say God will send you to hell or something. So
My point is that the whole danger in what the author was saying, what was his name, Arzt?
Arzt.
Was
Arzt.
and to some extent Jung also, is that you trap yourself when you put this into a historical context, because there can be the cultivation of the God image as he conceives it in any era.
Sure.
I mean, there even in eras or cultures. I mean, it's also culturally dependent. So, just to sort of make these historical remarks about time periods and so forth, I think it's just he's just trapping himself with that. To me, it's a universal human thing to do.
Okay, well, this was therein is my discomfort in Jungian thought. Okay, which you brought up Liz Green's article a few weeks ago, and I hadn't read it yet when you brought it up because I said, okay, she's an astrologer. Why do I need to read this? And what I understand is that Jung is talking about what the expectation is in the collective unconscious. Okay. And, I remember 30 years ago watching the Cosmos series that Carl Sagan did. And he was railing left, right, and center because there were 3,000, according to him, 3,000 columns on astrology in the world's newspapers and none on astronomy. Okay? And he was railing against that. And, okay, that made very logical sense to me then when I listened to that. But now in retrospect, I look back at it and say, hey, those guys are over on the rational side of the house, right? The physical world side of the house, and they're not understanding the emotional side at all, which is where psychotherapy is on the emotional side, and pretty much everything Dr. Jung was talking about, including religion, is all on the psychic side. It's not on the physical side, right? And so I think Jung's point, I mean, he can't change when he was born into history. And so are you suggesting that somehow he was trying to set himself up as a new messiah of some sort?
No, because I don't think he had that personality, but I think that he definitely set up a demarcation point at just the time that he was living. Probably because he had seen through some of these issues, and he'd seen through the materialist, the reductionist viewpoint.
Right.
And therefore he had to come up with a solution for himself, and therefore he was passing that on to the world. So I have no problem with that.
Right.
I'm just saying,
I
to make that into a historical watershed, I think is quite artificial.
Well, it is quite artificial.
But it was a pretty significant time. I mean, we just started the First World War and the Second
Right.
World War, and
Sure.
there had been nothing, there was unprecedented, anything like that in the history of, at least in Trump's world. No, I'm sorry. He's always talking about in the history of everything. This is the greatest moment of all.
Right.
But no, I was not.
I mean,
disparaging what he
look-
did at all. I'm just
No, but okay. So
or his
first,
approach,
first of
but-
all, at this table tonight is the first time. At this table tonight is the first time I've ever even thought about the idea that Jung might have been setting himself up as some sort of savior ex post facto. Okay, I mean, it's obvious that he, in all of his writing, was setting up an escrow for the future. Okay, just as Edinger did. In fact, Edinger explicitly talked about it in this book, where he said that he had a dream about escrows. And what Dr. Jung was doing, he knew that people of this time wouldn't even come close to understanding what the hell he was talking about. And he had been dumped on by everybody, including close friends like Victor White, for his whole life. Okay, it wasn't just a new thing, it was happening throughout his life. But he kept writing because he knew what he was doing. He knew what he was about.
That was
Now,
the private Jung.
pardon?
That was the private Jung.
Yeah.
The public Jung, he stuck to the task.
What? Yeah.
The psychology, as
Right, he
opposed to the Gnosticism and the whole.
Right. Okay. So he was being a therapist, but he was basing a lot of this stuff on things that he was getting out of his clinical life, right? So did he consciously or unconsciously think that he was leaving behind a body of knowledge? Was he leaving behind a body of knowledge, something like the Bible, that people would be able to comprehend 500 years hence and therefore point back to him as a unique person? Edinger did that, okay, in the next generation, okay, and Edinger died 20 years ago, so
But you could ask that question of every artist that's ever lived, because if they've got visionary art of any sort, was he consciously, did he realize that this would be so significant 100 years after he died, you know?
Well, he knew that there was.
He was just a
tendency-
creative person.
he
knew
was
there was-
having an experience, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, Vincent van Gogh.
Yeah.
Vincent
He
van
didn't,
Gogh, for those
I don't
of
think
you.
he set himself up to be, world famous after he died. I think
No,
he-
in fact, he said he didn't want that, and he said the Red Book was his book. It wasn't to be
Right.
used as a Bible sort
The-
of thing.
it was
Well,
his private
and that's
young-
why he didn't, and that's why it didn't get published. That's right.
But he talks all the time in the collected works, Jung does, about hearkening back to medieval times and the times of the alchemists, and they were doing what he was doing as secret knowledge. So he's actually acknowledging that this was happening just a few hundred years before him,
Oh, and it was happening.
but he was
It
systematizing
was
it.
happening. Yeah,
Well,
it was
he was-
happening
he was-
before Christ, but he was pulling it together.
He was hooking into a tradition that he thought was
Well, and he was
fading away.
right, and he was seeing. He was seeing that the message of the church is a fabrication. The the question is, if Christians realize that these issues are matters of the psyche, and not matters of the physical world. I mean, fundamentalists say the Bible is factual, okay, and every word of it is factually true, right? And yet that's not what it's about at all. I mean, that's what.
Well, that denudes it of its symbolic quality.
Pardon?
That denudes it of its symbolic qualities.
Right, and this is exactly Jung's point, which is, yes, every word of the Bible is true as a psychic fact, not as a physical fact. Okay, and so those psychic facts are running around in the heads of Christians everywhere, right?
Well, that's a product of the Reformation and the iconoclasts. They were destroying all
No,
the
it's
symbols for some reason.
What are you saying?
The iconoclasts,
Well, I understand about what an iconoclast is, but
the Protestants destroyed the images of the church. They were destroying the symbols of the church. That's how it got to be so reductionist, material, and factual, like you're saying.
right. Okay. So we took Jesus Christ off the cross and that sort of thing, which I agree. Okay. We destroyed those symbols, and it's for the same reason that Muslims don't allow images of Muhammad, because if you have an image of Muhammad, then you've concretized him, and he's no longer a spiritual person. But if you don't concretize him, if you let him be on the spiritual side of your psyche, on the psyche side, not on the physical side, it's like this M. Night Shyamalan, or whatever his name is, right? He's made several movies, Christian movies, where, okay, he's showing the young Christ, and the young Christ is the carpenter's son or the apprentice to the carpenter. And, they've got a cute blonde teenage guy playing Christ. But the problem,
rabbi.
yeah, a typical rabbi, typical rabbi in Middle East, in Palestine, here 2,000 years ago, right? But as soon as you do that, then you've concretized him, and then you brought him into the physical world, and he's no longer, as you correctly say, he's no longer a symbol then. And
But what is the Bible but a concretized, in terms of the way a fundamentalist looks at it is a concretized conception of the stories, because they're taken literally. There is no symbolic content.
And that's what Nietzsche and Jung and Edinger were all saying, that once you do that, then you can fight over it, which, there were Christians on both sides of World War II, right?
Right, but I remember when I was a Catholic, when I was young, that the symbols had, the concrete symbols like the saints and that sort of thing, they had a mana or an aura about them. They were not just concrete
Yeah, they were numinous.
things. They were numinous, and so that applied the meaning to them, the numinous meaning. And I think that when those get destroyed, those symbols, when they get destroyed, then what do they have to do? They could only go to the Bible then for their material images, and then they make that literal, you see.
So